So just letting you guys know that. Welcome to Wayside Women's Services Echo. If you haven't already, please put your name and organization in the chat. A little bit about Project Echo with Wayside Recovery Center. Project Echo, and the ECHO stands for Extension for Community Healthcare Outcomes, is a movement to demonopolize knowledge and amplify capacity to provide best practice care. The Wayside Women's Services Project Echo focuses on sharing practice and support services information, which will enable participating organizations to empower all people in recovery and empower women and families to break the cycle of addiction and trauma. I'm Zora Darcourt. I'm the Special Projects Manager at Wayside Recovery Center. I'll be helping host today's session and help with any technical difficulties if they come up. Also, I'll be looking over the chat as well. Today's topic is emotional management for people in recovery, and I'm pleased to have a great speaker today, Dr. Ken Martz. And I'll just read his bio quick and then pass things over. So Kenneth J. Martz is a licensed psychologist. He has worked in treatment and management of addiction, including gambling, for the past 25 years across settings, including outpatient, residential, and hospital settings. He was formerly the special assistant to the secretary for the Department of Drug and Alcohol Programs in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Dr. Martz has a doctorate in clinical psychology from the American School of Professional Psychology, and he has authored a dozen publications, including the international bestseller, Manage My Emotions. He has over 100 local, national, and international presentations in the addiction and treatment field. So I'm honored to present Dr. Ken Martz, and I will pass things over to you.
Thanks. Welcome, everybody. Welcome. So I love this material. So it means a couple of things are I'm gonna work quickly. Feel free to throw questions into the chat as we go along, because it will slow me down for 1 second. It just means I'll talk a little bit faster. So don't ever worry about asking questions. We'll still get to stuff. And I love this material, and I'd be happy to continue on conversation after if there was questions after. I'm the kind of person that's like, I will think of the best question about 10 minutes after we're done. So whatever it is, we'll get there together. So my contact information is up there. I love this material. I'll be happy to chat for forever. All right, so we're going to cover a lot of things today. Take a look a little bit about how do we identify the role of emotions in substance use disorder and recovery, identifying particularly a focus on the Therapeutic Alliance and some focus on what I'll call kind of the 5 key core emotions along the way. I'm going to take a quick look briefly about where we've been and where we're at now. And that builds a context about where are we trying to get to build out the Therapeutic Alliance, finding that emotional balance, and then continue it so that we know what to do, not only to learn a tool, but how to put things into practice to continue for long term. So pop quiz, because I'm like that, starting off right away, we are the instruments of change. And so I'll invite you to check in with yourself for a moment, because we are the instruments of change. Do you believe that an individual can change? This seems like such an obvious question in our field, that we obviously are here because we assume that folks can change. But then it's not as simple as it sounds right away, does it? Well, but I have depression, and I've got depression, so I'm always going to have depression. So everybody has depressions. Well, I've got this anxiety. The anxiety doesn't really ever go away. Well, I've got a intellectual disability. Well, I've got various things that you begin to wonder, and it begins to creep into our language. But if we don't believe that an individual can change, we won't be able to help them to get there. Okay. What is our fuel for our beliefs, our behaviors, and our motivation? Am I aware of what motivates me personally? Am I personally able to experience a range of emotions, or do I think there are some that are like bad? It's like no fear. I don't do anger. I don't do fear. I don't do, Where did these beliefs about emotional patterns develop from my past? Because if I have certain beliefs that, oh, don't ever get angry, how am I going to help someone else change their anger? Hint, hint, how do these beliefs affect the way that I work with individuals? So I'm going to play with some of these. We may start to untangle a couple of these beliefs along the way in this discussion. For our discussions today, we want to consider that addiction is inclusive of both substance use as well as process behavior addictions, such as gambling disorders. Addiction is being used as a term for the more severe substance use. So substance use disorder is severe. And consider for our conversation purposes that addiction is really a disease of hopelessness. It's a disease of shame and isolation. And when we begin to understand that, it begins to frame some of the work that we need to do to help individuals get up and out on the other side of that, and then to maintain a long-term sense of recovery beyond that. So some of you may have heard before the story of the blind men and the elephant. And so the first blind man walks up to the elephant and he says, "Aha, I understand. This elephant, it is like a spear." And the second blind man there with the green shirt, he walks up and he says, "Aha, elephant, it is like a garden hose. It sprays water at me." And the next one says, "Aha, elephant, it is sort of like a large palm tree branch." And the fourth person says, "Oh no, it is like a big wall." And the fifth says, "Oh no, it's like a tree. Oh no, it's like a rope." So we see the world through our own perception, through our own lenses. And so this is why we start with a few seconds of self-reflection, because what if we were wrong? Something to think about. Not that we would ever be wrong, but just in case. So let's go a quick word through history. Now, back in history, back in 1895, there was this thing called Bayer. You may know of them. They're the aspirin people, right? Bayer in 1895 had Bayer heroin. Yes, it is what it sounds like. You can see there the kids loved it. They were begging for it. "Please, mommy, give me my Bayer heroin." It was a cough suppressant at the time, and used very widely, apparently. But we've learned since then we wouldn't make that sort of mistake again. So instead, we had Coca-Cola. In the 1990s, you will find some of the original recipes. There was cocaine in the Coca-Cola. The coca in Coca-Cola was cocaine. We don't do that anymore. We've learned since then we would never make that sort of mistake. But 1994, we did much better. We learned that physicians, 20,000 physicians said camels are the best, Luckies are the best. You can't do any better than that. Let's get a little more modern. We couldn't make that sort of mistake. So 1966. Almost every decade, we've got another little conversation here about Mother's Little Helper. You may be stressed, take this pill, you too will love your kids again. Better living through chemistry was their tagline. By the way, within the addiction world, benzodiazepines remain the one substance which is much more common in women than in men. There was a whole marketing campaign that started back in the 60s, marketing benzodiazepines, particularly to moms. By a little bit later, in 1980, we have the famous Porter and Jick study. It says that letter to the editor from the New England Journal of Medicine, very prestigious. It says addiction is rare in patients treated with narcotics. Recently examined the current files of 39,000 hospitalized patients, blah, blah, blah. We conclude that despite widespread use of narcotics in hospitals, the development of addiction is rare in medical patients with no history of addiction. This is the entirety of the Porter and Jick study. You blink, you missed it. Now, however, a 1989 monograph for the National Institute of Health asked readers to consider the work of Porter and Jick. 1990, Scientific American said it was an extensive study, persuasive. It was a landmark study that demonstrates the exaggerated fear that people would become addicted to opiates was unwarranted. As late as 2007, the pain management textbook says it was a landmark report that did much to counteract the fears of pain patients would become addicted. A quick scan will find that this study has been cited in 1,400 other studies. This is the entire study. What if we made a mistake somewhere? we do know what's at the end of this story, if you hadn't already guessed. We decided that since opioids were safe, why would we allow people to remain in pain? Let's assess everyone for their pain and put them on an opioid. It's safe anyway. It would be inhumane to deny them their pain management care. We know that how this has progressed today into our opioid addiction process. So what if we were wrong? And where are we now? As we've gotten so focused in some of these areas, where are we today? Some things that are going on in the world today that may be causing some emotional unrest. We've got a wide range of a rapid increase in SUD and other addictions, certainly COVID. And as people have passed from COVID, there has been a wide range of grief, fear, isolation. And even though we're still starting to come out of these experiences, this has affected the environment tremendously. So we have poured billions into the treatment of SUD, even more so recently. And in the last 7 years, this is the line of national overdose deaths. It really hasn't improved despite the billions that we're pouring into it. And so what if we were wrong? How do we take a step back once in a while and try to see the whole picture and make the changes that we need to make? So I invite us to do that for just a moment. One of the things that we do know that works has been consistent over 50 years of study, is that the length of stay in treatment is the #1 predictor of outcome. So I'm only going to go back to, I won't bore you, I won't go all the way back, only back to 1997. Clear linear relationships there. The longer folks are in treatment, the reduction in new convictions. These are on the right here, you see 3 different meta-analyses of long-term residential programs for women, that the length of stay in treatment is directly related. NIDA took a look at those who stayed in treatment less than 90 days versus more than 90 days. It found significant growth in the 2000s. NIDA, even in 2018, the most current conversation on this, says that research indicated that most individuals need at least 3 months to significantly reduce or stop their drug use for the best outcomes. Unequivocally, that these are contingent on the adequate length of treatment. So we get really focused on what's the best process, what's the best element, what's the evidence-based practice. So for example, we begin to think about, Luckies or benzodiazepines may be an evidence-based practice, but it may or may not be what's best for a specific process, and it may not be appropriate if it's not the proper intensity and duration of treatment. And so the best known residential treatment with planned lengths of stay is 6 to 12 months. And actually it goes on to say that that the strongest outcomes are continuing even up to 9 months. Okay. All right, so let's play this out just for a second. As I've invited us already, how do we begin to remember? There's been a lot of focus, particularly in the recent years, on medications, which are very valuable advancements, but understand the whole picture. Always remember the whole picture. We need to treat the whole person. So medications are an important element, but how do we also make sure that they have proper health care, recovery management skills, trauma management, social, spiritual services for those that are connected there, relationships, critical, emotional management, motivation and beliefs. We need to manage the whole person with all of the fuel that continues to get us up and moving into our lives. The more of these elements, the more of the whole person that we can engage, the more likely we are to help them to continue and stay strong in their progress with us and beyond. So let's begin to move a little bit into our future and think about how do we keep this individual at the heart of our efforts, into the center of the process. Begin with relationships. As professionals, it is our role to foster recovery supportive relationships. It's the first and perhaps most important thing we can do, quite frankly, which is consistent with some of the research out there. Actually, the relationship is more powerful than the evidence-based practice chosen. So if we know that addiction is the disease of isolation, can you begin to see why relationships, again, are going to be such a critical element in engaging someone and moving them beyond where they are? So, not surprisingly, William White, among others, have taken a look at some of the things that are reflective of good recovery. And in some of the recovery assessments, we'll take a look at things like citizenship, a sense of belonging, social supports like positive relationships, global health, such as confidence, recovery experience, such as life purpose and optimism, and sobriety and substance use, achieving abstinence. So amongst the things that are markers of good recovery, relationships end up being strong on the list here in a range of things. So those sense of, specifically that sense of isolation or connection, feeling like I have a positive communication with my family and community. I have friends who are supportive of my recovery process. I have affiliation with local recovery supports. That our relationships, plural, become critical. And didn't I start with a conversation about, do I believe that change is possible? If I don't believe that change is possible, don't our clients come to us with a sense of hopelessness? I've tried everything, nothing works. What do you expect from me? You know, my personal values and sense of right and wrong have become stronger in the recent years. I have values and goals greater for the future. I know that my life has a purpose. When I begin to have hope, I can begin to then build relationships and begin to have a wider range of life experience. So in the therapy process, that specific relationship gets focused on the Therapeutic Alliance. How do we begin to foster individual change by making a safe and trusting relationship? And this is the basis of any other technique that we're going to end up using. All the techniques are valuable, but they're only going to work in the context of, if this client doesn't trust me, we're not going to get anywhere. Okay. Another element there, of course, cultural competency. Can we translate and communicate across everything from age, race, gender, sexual orientation, socioeconomic status, et cetera, et cetera? And how do we begin to be aware of that as a barrier to our relationships or a facilitator to our relationships? Relationships, again, just critical. So we can begin to do some certain things such as empathy, warmth, genuineness, all the things that you've always heard about. But it really is important that we let them know along the way that we are a safe space to explore particularly the difficult emotions. It may be important that we begin with just time and consistency. You know, when you cancel appointments all the time, is that going to create a safe space? Are they going to feel where they can trust you, they can rely on you? Through years of practice, I've sometimes been concerned, but observed that it's like, if I go away on vacation, suddenly 2 or 3 of the clients disappear. You know, it is not that it should be that way. And it's not that we as counselors don't need our time and vacations and relief times, but that sense of time and consistency and relationship is critical. Really important. People don't change until they feel safe. You know, sometimes I've had clients that will be working with for some months even, and suddenly walk in and say, all right, now let me tell you what's really going on. And you know it's going to be that talk about the trauma that they may have mentioned before, maybe never told anybody, maybe whatever, but they're not going to get there until they feel safe. And they will feel safe when they have a solid therapeutic relationship. So this begins our first place here. It's only in that context of a solid therapeutic relationship, where else am I going to explore my fears? How am I going to share my fear with you if I don't feel safe? So as professionals, it's our work to move from external interventions to helping them to manage their internal world. So very often that we get a lot of focus on CBT, focusing on thoughts, which are critical, but we also have to begin to take a look at the heart as well, and emotions. I'm going to veer left for just a second to talk about stress management to help begin to build a context for some of the next pieces of the conversation. So we know that if I have 0 stress, I won't get out of bed in the morning. So after I lay in bed, I'm going to say, oh, it's nice, it's cool in here, it's warm in here. I'm going to just rest and hit the snooze button a couple more times. And then, you know, what's going to happen next? I'm going to say, all right, I'm starting to get hungry. So I guess I better get out of bed and go downstairs and get something to eat so that I don't die. So I get down the refrigerator and I say, oh, I guess I better go to the store and get some food so I can eat so I don't die. I get to the store and I say, oops, I guess I better go get a job so I can get some money so I can eat so I don't die. You see what starts happening here? A little bit of stress actually increases our motivation. This is called eustress. It's generally defined as the amount of stress that gets us up and moving in the world. At a certain point, we hit what we think of as peak performance at the top there, and anything beyond that moves into distress. This is where we think of what we think of with stress, where it starts to be overloaded and exhausted and have heart attacks and all sorts of things. I put to you that our goal is not to get rid of stress. Our goal is to try to manage it at, I like to put it at this kind of target area here, not quite at the top point, because if you try and surf at the top, at some point you're going to slip over into distress and have symptoms and have problems. So try to stay just ahead of that. So you have a little bit of wriggle room for when the bumps happen in life. Okay, so stress management. We're not trying to stop it. We're trying to contain it. Two key ways that we can manage that. One is by building resiliency, so that as I am sleeping right, exercising, eating my vitamins and healthy diet, et cetera, doing recovery related behaviors, I can actually manage more stressors when they come to me. And of course, the way we usually think of it is the other direction is remove the stressor, but some things we can't get away from. I may not be able to get away from my job. I may not be able to move from my physical location. So some things we need to manage in different manners. Okay, but either way we get there, we're looking at ways to build that resilience and balance it into the center. So to begin this conversation then onto emotions, we're going to begin to think about it for 5 key centerpieces. So the first one, for example, is fear. And fear has such a negative connotation. It's just like stress. You know, I don't want fear, no fear, no fear, no fear, no fear. When this emotion is imbalanced, we call it courage. So it's really important that we do have fear, just like stress. If I actually had, you know, that hat that says no fear, you know, I would walk out in front of a car and I'd be dead, because I wouldn't be afraid of danger. Fear is there to protect us from danger. Now, if I had too much fear, I'd be like the deer in the headlights, and I'm gonna freeze, and then I'm gonna be dead because I have too much fear. Same thing all the way around the circle. Every one of these emotions, we need it in balance. Not too much, not too little. Think Goldilocks all the way through. Anger is the same way. We have a negative. Some people have a negative connotation. I was recently talking to somebody, and they said, "Oh yeah, I don't do anger. I never get angry." Okay, so you can draw your own conclusions. Maybe some of you have said such a thing before. So maybe I've said such a thing sometime before in my life. But if I had zero anger, what I would end up with is being passive. I would end up being stepped on all the time and be angry at the whole world because everybody's stepping on me. If I have too much, I might be in a rage and fighting people. So a different word for that sense imbalance is drive or assertiveness. How do I find that balance? Not too much, not too little, just right. Same thing, even joy, there can be too much. It's called mania. Every one of these, how do we find that balance of compassion, balance of respect, balance of ourselves? So we're going to play with these over the course of over the next bit here. Now, once you know the basic sense, you can begin to have a range of emotions within each of these 5 categories. So for example, I'm going to just pick one, for example. We're not going to go into, I'm not going to bore you by reading all this list of emotions, but brave, daring, grit, valor, perseverance, endurance, all that sense of courage that continues to go and that stick-to-itiveness versus fear, confusion, horror, panic, terror, shaken. Wide range of emotions within these major categories. So something to think about. Sometimes our clients come to us and are not good at labeling their emotions. Maybe I wasn't good at labeling my emotions someday. So you might consider with a beginner, even starting with a feelings wheel that looks like more like one on the left, where let's just start with the basic 5. Let's just start with the basic, couple of emotions and begin to get you into the ballpark. I also have a children's edition of the feelings wheel. It's just kind of in between there, just very basic level emotions, so that can be age appropriate variations. So think about the person that you're with and how do we choose a feelings wheel that will be appropriate. Now, this is a whole master's degree in a slide. So we're going to layer this back a few times, and I do lots more training on this. This is a area that so I'm not going to give you all the theory behind some of this, but begin to understand some of the conversation. A client walks in and says, I'm angry with my spouse because they said such and such. And so I say, okay, we've got anger. Good. Let's take a look at the feelings wheel. What else are you feeling? And sometimes you'll see some right away, and sometimes you won't see it. And then you think, okay, hurt, a little bit of fear. She's getting, what if she leaves me? Well, and then I felt kind of embarrassed and weak because she saw my vulnerabilities. So as you begin to look at these emotions, the intervention for hurt may be different than the intervention for anger, may be different than the intervention for fear. And I may be experiencing all of the 5 at some point. And so it's really important to help them to articulate what's going on there, because if you can get to the one that's a little bit more at the root, by the way, hint, hint, I often say that anger is a BS emotion. It always covers up something else, usually a fear. And if you can get to what the fear is, or get what the fear of loss may be, it's much more powerful. It takes away, when you deal with something at the root emotion, the whole rest of the circle starts to come back into balance. Okay, so let's go around the circle yet again. Like I said, I'm going to start to layer this so it'll make more and more sense as we continue along. So within the context of addiction and recovery, perhaps I may have a fear of being caught. I'm going to lie because you're going to catch me, and then I'm going to go to jail, or I'm going to be embarrassed, or I'm going to be whatever. Versus having the courage to ask for help. How do I sometimes feel helpless and anger at myself, the world, and everybody in the world? Versus, can I see a future and a vision and have hope in the world? Have I ever been isolated and hungry for pleasure, for connection? Or am I able to partner with providers, with the therapist, with friends, family, colleagues, and build contacts? The 12-step tradition is centered on a social support network, a peer support network. Compassion. What are, oh my gosh, this one's a touchy one. Selfishness and self-focus. When I'm in the middle of my addiction process, am I doing the things that I need for me because I'm in the middle of withdrawal? I need to do this, I need to do this, I need to do this. And when I'm in the middle of that rush, am I paying attention to my family, my children, everything else under the sun? Am I even able to, by the way, is a different conversation, in the middle of that, of the crisis mode, in the middle of that reptilian brain controlling it? And how do I move from that hate or shame or grief over my losses to believing that I'm worthy of recovery? This is one of the ones that tends to get in the way a lot. Also, remember we started this conversation, do I believe that change is possible? The next one that's sometimes hiding behind that, I don't believe I can change, is I don't believe that I'm worthy. Very undermining fear or belief. So let's build this. And again, I'm not going to go through every single one of these, but I really want to begin to get a flavor of how this continues to circle around. So we're back to the original emotional circle. There may be a challenge and there may be tasks to work with each and every one of these. So one of the challenges with fear, just like the deer in the headlights, is being frozen in that addictive process. So folks come to us in their addiction process for days, months, years, decades, just frozen, repeating that Groundhog Day again and again and again. I can't change. How do we kind of stop that frozen pattern, that fear pattern, and find the causes, the motivations, and find that hope of alternatives? Yet, yes, you can do different things. The challenge of lack of confidence. Do I believe that I can change? Can I see a way out? I was working in prison for a number of years, and a client turns to me and says, well, what do you want me to do? Go work at McDonald's? You know, and as we discussed it further, it was very clear, didn't see any way out other than getting out of prison, going and selling drugs again. Couldn't see any way beyond that. Okay? If I don't believe there's any hope, if I don't believe there's any vision of any way to get out, I'm going to be hopeless and stuck with that lack of self-confidence. Okay, we're going to play around with each of these as we continue along. Challenges for lack of joy, self-defeating beliefs, and lack of pro-social values. So how do we begin to find what our values are? And so you begin to hear, as we continue to circle around here, that much like the flower analogy that I used before, beliefs, motivation, emotions, values, these are all going to get pulled into this process. All right, so the change process, I'm going to make it very simple for a moment. Step number one, stop the autopilot. You've got to bring awareness. Awareness, awareness, awareness. Didn't we already begin with just using the feelings wheel as an awareness tool to identify what emotions I've got? And that will help to pinpoint some of the ways to intervene. Attention. How do we become particularly aware of an emotion? Examine by deepening the awareness of the emotion and related issues. Much like I said, sometimes my anger is connected to my fear, is connected to my sense of self-worth. Intervention. So choose an activity that will be specific to intervene with the area of concern that I've got. And then practice, repeat often, repeat often, repeat often, until it becomes the norm. All right. So we learn to build a new practice into the brain to maintain that. Now, just because I'm like that, we are the tools of change. I'll invite you to also take a moment and consider for yourself, amongst this circle of emotions, which ones are strong or weak for you personally. And you may find that, oh my gosh, and don't worry, I'm not going to ask you to put it out there. It's okay. But do consider for yourself for a second. Have you been living in fear lately? Have you been living in a whole lot of grief? Have you been angry? Which of these has your life been flat and boring? Notice where we're at. Are you so compassionate and you're giving and giving and giving and exhausted somehow? We get into that burnout as counselors. Begin to notice which of these areas are strong and which of these areas are weak for you. And there may develop a pattern that you start to notice around the circle. You may find, of course, that 2 will be strong and 2 will be weak, or 3 will be strong and 2 will be weak, vice versa. Okay, so let's play with that just for a moment, and you can reconsider your examples, your answers in the next slide a little bit. Imagine for a moment we have an individual who is a 32-year-old male with sports betting. So he may have symptoms of impulsivity, gregariousness, irritability, racing thoughts, fear about being found out with the financial losses. And he may be very strong on that sense of gregariousness, that joy, that hypomanic style, the irritability, the racing thoughts, almost driven into the anger and fears. But at the same time, there's such a lack of values, a lack of compassion, because they're so busy off in that rush and race and charge. So there may be a plus, stronger on one half and weaker on the other half of the circle. There will be a relationship amongst these elements in the circle, by the way. Now consider for a moment, we have a female, 52-year-old female using slot machines, stealing from the church to fund her gambling. Her symptoms are being frozen with fear, passive and unable to ask for help, isolation and loneliness. So she may be having a lack of joy, a lack of direction. So she has the mirror image symptoms than the individual before. Now, obviously, this circle can be broken in various directions depending on the individual that's in front of us. But very often, when we have an area that's in excess or strong, there will be another area that's weaker. So it begins to give you some clues that if the person is having weakness in one of those areas, how do we begin to use the areas that are on the weaker side to help strengthen the areas that are strong? So for example, if this woman is working at her church and she's, so trying to give, she's being passive and unable for herself. It's really hard. You don't want to stop them from giving. You don't want to stop her from being compassionate, which builds into her guilt, by the way. We're not trying to get rid of that. Why would we? We want a full range of emotion, but we want to build a little bit more drive and assertiveness. So we're bringing this balance of certain emotions back into balance. Okay. So begin to think about how to grow the areas that are weak rather than trying to fight the areas that are already strong. So let's go around the circle one more time. Take a look at a couple of tools, and this is just a taste of a couple of tools for each one. So fear, one of the most common ones for fears is scaling. We rate our fears on a scale of 1 to 10. It might even be exposure. Specific phobias, this is one of the most traditional approaches. If I'm afraid of snakes, I'll imagine a book about snakes, and then I'll imagine it's a tiny snake, and then I'll imagine it's a snake that's in the room but across the room. So exposure to imagined exposure to the feared elements. One I like to call grandmother hug. It's like just do a visualization, imagining that grandmother or auntie, that loving person in your life that just gives you a big hug and where it just feels safe and okay and calms those fears. If you're into affirmations, you may use affirmations and belief supports such as I'm courageous, I trust, I'm flexible. So just some simple things to help to balance these. So for anger and drive, identify sources of anger. Deep breathing, one of the most traditional ones for anger. Take a few deep breaths. Take a breath and count to 10. Identify decisions and solutions, physical exercises, journaling, assertiveness training. I have a clear vision of my life and I ask for what I need. How do I identify pleasures? Can I smile? Can I laugh? Can I tell a joke? Have you ever been in a treatment program where we actually tell jokes, and remember the joy of living, and you start to know when someone's starting to poke their head out of their addiction process because it's like, oh yeah, I can see outside of myself for a second. Okay. Massage, again, breathing techniques, affirmations such as I celebrate success. I have playtime. I'm worthy of playtime. I have partners in life. I'm not alone. All key elements within this circle. In the next, there's a sense of compassion. So within the sense of compassion, there may be that sweetness, that compassionate heart, that touch or a big hug, that grandmother hug. You notice how the grandmother hug calms the fear. So you see how these start to work again at opposite ends of the circle. They start to support one another. Donations, volunteerings, gifts, that I take care of the folks around me, grounding techniques. So things like feeling the ground underneath my feet, seeing 3 things in the room that are red, feeling, hearing sounds in the room, etc. Various grounding techniques. Affirmations such as I am stable despite challenges. I have all that I need. I have enough to share with others. Isn't that the opposite of that scarcity mentality of, oh my gosh, I'm running out of my substance? Okay. And certainly not least, how do I begin? Everyone has values. How do I begin to get clear about my values? How do I begin to differentiate needs versus wants? If I've got grief, and which is very common, of course, some things like letter writing to the individual and knowing that it will be burned. You can say freely whatever you got to say. That's no shame or with that. Connecting with spirituality. Very common is a gratitude journal. Every night I write down 3 things I'm proud of today, three things that I'm grateful for today. I have a colleague in recovery for about 30 years now. He has done his gratitude journal for decades, and he now has a whole bookshelf of his gratitude memories. And very powerful tool, very powerful practice, very easy practice. And he knows I talk about him. He's very, very open with his story. And so even when he hit on some very difficult times and his foster child passed away, he leaned on that and knew his value and his strength and his gratitude to help guide himself back out, even some of the most challenging times. Very powerful approaches. I love things that balance also both simple and effective. Apologies. When you think about how do I begin to recover from some of the wounds of my past, and where do I maybe need to make an apology, or where do I need to receive some? Remembering that I'm valuable, I respect those around me, and I'm deserving and worthy of life. So we begin to play a little bit with the range of emotions. And as we begin to play with those range of emotions, we begin also to not only do those simple practices, but continue them. Practice, practice, practice. This is how we get into the future. Once we learn a skill, there's research out there, by the way, that very often we go to a cool training, we learn something really insightful, and then we go back to our office tomorrow and go back and do the same old thing we always used to do. I invite you not to do that now. I might invite you to not to do that one more time before we're through. Take the things that we're learning and let's use them. Let's learn how to practice them, because the more you practice them, the better and more skilled at it you will get. Okay, so there's an old James Taylor song says, "Now that we love, how do we make love stay?" And my answer to that, one of the answers to that, is practice, practice, practice. Now, a rhetorical question, but what happens when you practice? You get better at it. It gets easier. We're more likely to do it. Okay, so when I talk about the brain elements of addiction, of the addiction process, one of the things we find is the levels that there is an electrochemical addiction process where, much like learning our times tables, we practice addiction processes for decades, and we became good at it. And now we're starting this early recovery thing. And so it may take a day, a week, a month, a year. As we practice those recovery behaviors, we will get better and better at them. They will become stronger than the addiction practices that we've developed for so many years. So how do we begin to do that a little bit more purposefully, a little more consistently, and really use those skills effectively? So there's a few things you can begin to think about to make it exponentially more likely that you will actually start a practice and continue it. So for example, you want to make sure that it is clear and objective and specific. So if you want to say, hey, yeah, I'm going to do a gratitude practice. I'm going to start a gratitude journal. Sounds like fun. Maybe you'll do it, maybe you won't. Maybe some of you did a New Year's resolution, and by 2 weeks later, you stopped doing it. So how do we begin? It's very human. We all do this. So how do we begin to make it more likely that we'll follow through? You've got the client motivated, you've got yourself motivated. Now, how do we begin to carry that forward? So I'm going to take it step by step, and I'm going to just make this up here. For example, I will, for the sake of Joe, my 42-year-old spouse. So who is this practice for? Who's going to benefit from this practice that you want to take on? Notice what just happened here. Just by saying that I'm going to do this for the sake of my spouse, I'm going to do this for the sake of my daughter, I'm going to do this for the sake of someone other than myself, you hear the motivation growing there. Next question is, what is the practice itself? I will write 3 things that I'm grateful for in my journal every day before bed. Every night before bed. You see how that's getting a little more specific than just saying I'm going to do a journaling practice. Okay, right before bed, I'm going to go write, and I'm going to write 3 things. Very specific, very precise. Now, I don't know about you, I'll do that for 2 nights, I'll forget. So what will I do as a reminder? How will I remember to do this? Oh, I'll remind myself by placing the gratitude journal underneath my pillow. When I wake up in the morning, I'll take the gratitude journal, I'll put it back under the pillow. First thing I do when I get in the bed, I'm going to bump up against it. I will not forget about my gratitude journal here. Oh yeah, stop, write it three things, set it on the nightstand, go to sleep. See what's happened. Each one of these elements makes it exponentially more likely that it will follow through. So we just spent time taking a look at practices for each of the different emotions. These are some ways to use this that will again remind us. Absolutely, our phones are great tools as well, and they will also ping at us. One of the other things I often use as reminders is the phone. I will actually put in, without giving away too many secrets, I've actually put in calendars into my Outlook calendar. So for example, every 3 weeks on a Monday at 11:42, it'll pop up and say, what are you grateful for today? And then every 2 weeks on Thursday at 4:45 p.m., it'll say, who will be judged today? And so you see what happens there. They're set at different odd times, so it'll catch you off guard and help pull you out of that autopilot back into life. You can put 1,000 different ones of these in there that will just give you reminders throughout the day. The next will be next thing you can do would be to develop a partner. I will ask Janet, my best friend, to check in with me to discuss how I'm progressing every Monday morning once the kids go to school. Okay. If I'm successful, I'll get a hug from Janet. If not, I'll give Janet a hug. So notice what's happening here. We're also creating not only creating a partner, which will, every time I see Janet now, my best friend, I'm going to know, did I do it? Is she going to ask me about it? And so you now have an accountability support, whether or not they ask you, whether or not they're being mean about it, just they're here to help you. And you have a success goal that will also give you a reward as well. There's dozens of examples of these. One other one, for the sake of Mary, my 12-year-old daughter, I will ask my family how their day was and practice listening for 5 minutes every day at the beginning of dinner time. I'll remind myself by placing flowers on the table. As soon as I sit down, with the flowers on the table, like, oh yeah, I'm supposed to stop and listen for a second. I'll ask Jane, my best friend, to check in with me about how I'm progressing over coffee. And if I'm successful, I'll get a cookie. If I'm not successful, I buy the cookie for Jane. You can have fun with this. The more you have fun with it, the more you be creative, more engaging, the more you do it. Very often then, once you start doing this with Jane, for example, she may decide that I have a practice too. I want to better my life as well and those around me. So will you be my partner and we'll help each other to grow? Notice it could be something as simple as listening. It could be something more complicated as in my recovery practices. Okay, you could put in any practice whatsoever, from going to a meeting, going consistently, take my medications as prescribed, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You can put in thousands of different practices using the same structure to make it more likely that you'll begin to do them. Landing the plane, kind of bringing back around a little bit. I just a couple of words, because I always get asked this one as I do if you hadn't guessed, I'm a fan of the toolbox approach. Let's identify a wide range of tools and use the one that's right for the person that's in front of me. Just because these are my favorite tools may not be your favorite tools, but I'll tell you, a couple of words about some things that I particularly am fond of. But you still have to choose or adapt depending upon the client that's in front of you. One of my favorites absolutely is abdominal breathing. It's particularly calming. It's versatile. They can do it anywhere they need. One of the fastest ways to bring down stress and anxiety and anger. One of the fastest ways to make a physiologic state change. Meditation, absolutely. If I only had one tool, it would be meditation. It is not for everybody. It is excellent for awareness. It is excellent for prevention. It's excellent for impulse control. So I'm going to sit there and bring my awareness to my breath. And my mind is going to wander off. Squirrel. Oh yeah, breathe. Squirrel. Oh, breathe. I can't do this meditation thing. Breathe. Okay. So people get frustrated with it, but that's just a part of the process. Now, the reason, by the way, it is also evidence-based for addictions processes, and one of the reasons I say that, one of the reasons I conclude why that is that while you're sitting there, your 5-minute meditation, you have 10,000 thoughts that go in different directions that you identify and recognize and don't give into when you draw back to your preferred point of focus. So isn't that what recovery is? I recognize when I have an impulse to use, I redirect back to my recovery focus, my current values. 1,000 times in your 5-minute meditation, you're identifying your trigger, redirecting back, identify the trigger, redirecting back. So important skill for recovery. Feelings wheel, if you hadn't guessed, I use with almost every one of my clients. There's a couple of different variations. Letting go, forgiveness practices. We talked about letter writing, for example. So how do we unhook some of our emotions that are tied up in our past? So-and-so hurt me, and I continue to say, well, I'm never going to do that again. Well, my arms get tired of doing this after a while. So how do I begin to unhook some of the armor from my past and heal from my past? Also begin to think a little bit about the future perspective. For example, vision boarding, goal setting, some things like that. Just even conversations. It's very often one of my first sessions with the client will be, what do you really want to get out of our time together? What's our goals for our time together? And it's never just stop using, okay? What do you want to get a little further? And as you begin to build a vision about what they might want in their future, in their life, we can then begin to build a path of what's on track or off track from that vision that they have. Okay. I would invite that in addition to practice, one of the other things that seems to work is consider that we are individuals in the context of relationships. So you hear me wrapping around full circle again. When I start getting my emotions in balance, that affects all of my relationships with my peers, my family, my extended family, my teachers, my judge, my probation officer, my counselor, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, my church. So we have all these relationships of people that care about us and support us to stay where we need to be in life. They become supports around us at the early recovery, middle recovery, and late recovery. So I guide you to remember that we are here because the people we serve can change if we reach the heart of their issues. Our belief that they can change is central to the work. I want to always remember to be centered on the relationships, because that is what's going to help them to feel safe and be able to go into the deeper emotional work. Wherever their emotional area is weak, think about ways to begin to build that into balance, and practice in ways to grow their strength and courage. I will ask you, by the way, to begin to think about questions, but also what else can I do to effortlessly further recovery practices in my office today? I mentioned before, we so often will go learn something valuable, but then go back about our day and not do something. What are you going to put into practice today? I listed dozens of tools. Just pick one that you want to try with somebody today, or try with yourself. I'm going to go try breathing for a few minutes today. I'm going to go do something else, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Remember that we often have our own tunnel visions. We often get caught in our own beliefs, and we want to remember to find the whole person and get to the heart of that person, so we can really begin to make changes that are heartfelt and lasting. I love research and references, et cetera, et cetera. And I love this material, as I've mentioned. I'm going to pause and take a breath for a second and check out if there are any questions. You can throw them into the chat box. If you don't think of it right away, you are always welcome to contact me afterwards. There's also there, I'll throw it in the chat box too, a link. You can have my meditation toolbox. It has guided meditations, all set up for folks that are to start from day one of meditation and beyond. If you get over there relatively soon, my coping skills toolbox is also free over there. It's the tools that I use every day with clients in my clinical practice, everything from teaching how to breathe to et cetera, et cetera. Who does meditation typically not work for? I love that question. Excellent. Thank you. There's very, very, very few. The ones that are more challenging for is ADHD, for example. That does not mean it does not work. Think about what's weak, and we're going to strengthen it. So if I have a weakness in my attention deficits, my mind's going to wander. What will help with that? Practicing concentration, practicing concentration, practicing. The challenge becomes that I give up. I feel like it's too hard, and so then I can't do it. So I give up. And so that's where in management meditation, the meditation training book, it purposely starts in 3-minute increments. Start slow. Anybody can breathe for, actually the day 1 exercise is just breathe for a couple of minutes. Okay, don't get into all that. I'm going to do put all this weight on it. Just breathe a couple minutes and then breathe a little longer. And, you know, it guides into a little bit easier. There is really no known solid contraindication for meditation, but it does have, in my research sheet, there's research out there for work, for love, for relationships, for depression, anxiety, et cetera, et cetera. Anything that stress helps, it helps. I love a lot of tools, but that happens to be, you know, as I said, just my particular favorite. Like I said, feel free to chat any other questions. If you've had trouble with it, Misty, absolutely keep trying. Don't give up. That's why we have practices. Usually one of 2 things are happen where someone gets stuck, which is why I talk about the practice, is you know, somebody tries to sit down and do like a 30-minute meditation, or they forget. So the practice system that I talked about a moment ago will help you to remember, help you to stay consistently, and etc. Yes, radical acceptance. What about it? Excellent principle as well. How do you begin to really develop and stay heart-centered? You know what I'm saying? DBT skills, absolutely. DBT will have some, in its more depth, some elements here that you may have heard today. How do you begin to understand that balance of I accept you where you are and I expect more? And anybody that works with me knows that I am fierce about this, that it's like, I have got your back, I am with you, I am not giving up on you, and we're going to move forward together. I believe in you and I will help you to that next step. And I may not be right for you, so occasionally there will be somebody that is better referred to somebody else still. But if we're a good fit, I'm with you and I will support you, and it is a safe space to go to wherever we need to go to get you to your next steps. All right, excellent, excellent. Last chance for any other questions. Otherwise, like I say, you can always catch me afterwards. And I believe we have some info on continuing education or certificates.
Yes. Thank you, Dr. Martz. That was so powerful, so insightful. I think you've given us a lot of gems that we can apply to the work that we do, but also in our personal lives as well. So thank you. It's been an honor to have you. Just a little information for everybody who participated today. You can get CEU for this session. So I'll be sending out a survey within the next couple of days. And on that survey, it will ask if you want CEU. So that's how I'll know. And then I'll send the CEU out within those next couple of weeks. So thank you all for attending and joining us today. Again, thank you, Dr. Martz. It's been an honor. Great session. Learned a lot. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody.
Enjoy your day, everyone.